Fierce clashes between Palestinians and Israeli officers at a funeral procession in East Jerusalem. We'll have more on those details coming up soon. Russian forces last week allegedly opened fire on Israeli jets in northwestern Syria in what could possibly be a significant shift in Moscow's attitude towards Israel. And we'll have the latest on the Russian invasion. Ukraine's military says its forces complete their combat mission in the besieged city of Mariupol. Welcome to the i24 News Desk. I'm Sarah Shalala. Stay with us for the next half an hour. We'll be taking a look at some of today's top stories. So let's start right here in Israel, where we saw fierce clashes erupt at a funeral procession in East Jerusalem on Monday night, those being between Palestinians and police officers. Well, this happening at the funeral of a Palestinian man who died after being critically wounded during clashes on the Temple Mount last month. Police saying 6 officers were lightly wounded during those scuffles, both during the procession and at the gravesite. At least 15 Palestinians have been arrested, according to police, and according to the Red Crescent, 71 Palestinians have injuries from rubber bullets, stun grenades and beatings. 13 have been transported to hospital. The officers injured were wounded by stones which were hurled at them by hundreds of rioters at a cemetery near Jerusalem's Old City. Well, let's talk about this in a little bit more detail. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Regev is here with me in the studio. Well, Jonathan, we are hearing of a separate attack, which is an attempted stabbing attack in Nablus. Do you have any more details about that incident?
Yes, just outside the city of Nablus, it's just outside of the city. There's an Israeli base there, and this has been the site of various stabbing attempts in the past. Stabbing and ramming attacks this morning. A Palestinian approached the 2 soldiers standing there. They were basically looking at him already before he approached them. He looked suspicious, was behaving suspicious, and then he tried to approach them with a knife. The soldiers then shooting him and injuring him. Of course, he was given military medical assistance at the site by the same soldiers that he was trying to stab. By the way, they are the first ones to give him medical assistance before he was taken to hospital. This happening this morning just outside the city of Nablus. Again, an area which has seen plenty of similar attacks in the past.
Jonathan, let's move on to a slightly different topic. This is in regards to Syria, Israel and Russian ties. So we saw, there's still unconfirmed reports, by the way, but apparently an incident happened last week. Allegedly, Russian forces opened fire on Israeli jets, and the Israeli jets at the time are actually conducting and doing some raids and targeting, attacking some targets there over Syria, in the northwestern part of Syria. Some reports out there are saying that it could possibly be the start of some shifts, a significant shift in the ties between Israel and Moscow. Is it fair to say that, or are we jumping to some conclusions there?
It might be true. Everything is unconfirmed at the time, but we do know that Israel took a lot of criticism from Western countries at the beginning of the Russian invasion to Ukraine for what seemed as a neutral Israeli stand. Israel basically refusing most of the time, at least at the beginning of the conflict, refusing to criticize Russia, simply understanding that Israel, in a way, we could say, also bordering Russia itself due to the presence of Russian forces in Syria, right on Israel's northwestern border. With time, as the Russian invasion continued and more reports came out of Ukraine, Israel did start to take a more pro-Ukraine stand and took a lot of criticism from Moscow at the time. Perhaps it could be that the Russian response to that Israeli criticism, taking a more and more the stand of Western countries against Russia when it comes to Ukraine, and it might the Russian response might be this one. For the first time, the Russian S-300 anti-aircraft batteries participated in the fire directed at Israeli jets, allegedly operating in the skies over Syria. We know that there are constant Israeli raids in Syria all the time, and the anti-aircraft fired by Syrian forces at those jets is usually very, very indirect, let's call it, very not really putting the jets in danger. Syrian anti-aircraft fire not being very effective. The Russian batteries, the S-300, are of course a different story. Up until now, not only that the S-300 batteries basically placed there by the Russians were not in use, not even Syrian soldiers were not allowed to use those same batteries given to Syria by Russia against Israeli jets. That policy may be changing now. Again, no confirmation, not from Israel, not from Russia, but this could be the Russian response to the fact that Israel is taking a more and more pro-Ukrainian stand in the Ukraine conflict, and that is something that Israel clearly feared. The fact that its freedom of operation in the skies over Syria may be hurt due to the position that it is more and more taking in favor of Ukraine.
Jonathan Regev, our defense correspondent, keeping us updated with the latest. Thank you very much. Well, let's go straight to the scene now where our correspondent Pierre Clochendler is live in Jerusalem. There, Pierre, last night's events happened where you're at right now. So tell us about the sense you get, the feel on the ground there just a day after those clashes.
Well, life is returning to normal here on Salah ad-Din Street, which is one of the main thoroughfare and commercial centers of East Jerusalem alongside the wall of the old city. But earlier we've seen municipal workers collecting the stones of the rioting yesterday. The street was blocked by a barrier to allow trucks to circulate freely in this thoroughfare and in order to collect the stones. And we're just next, adjacent to the Al-Mujahideen cemetery where Walid al-Sharif was buried yesterday night. And you can see the cemetery, it has been also restored more or less to its previous state after municipal workers collected marble slabs that were probably thrown at the police forces earlier. And the situation now returns to normal, but we've spoken to some people here, and they're telling us that basically this looks like a third Intifada uprising. They say this is something that we didn't see before, and basically last year clashes were in a sense less violent than yesterday night. Yesterday night, water containers, huge water containers, were thrown from the rooftops of this street upon on the police forces, something that we haven't seen for a long time here.
And Pierre, just amid all of these recent attacks and the tensions that are happening in Israel and the West Bank, how do you think police are handling themselves and preparing for what's to come?
There's a lot of criticism at the police because funerals are always very sensitive moments within Palestinian society, but not only. And when police forces are escorting funerals and funeral rites at the Temple Mount or Noble Sanctuary, like yesterday evening, start to inflame the spirit of the participants with slogans, nationalistic and religious slogans such as "Millions of martyrs are marching on Jerusalem." This is perceived obviously by the Israeli police as something threatening, but it seems that each time the police is unable on one hand to control those funeral ceremonies, and on the other to avoid such unnecessarily proximity between the police and the participants of those funeral rites, and that creates a lot of tension. We've seen that only on Friday with Shireen Abu Akleh, and now the apostolical envoy of the Vatican has published a condemnation of the disproportionate use of force by the police forces, according to him. The police entering a hospital without previous agreement by the hospital. The police almost toppling the coffin of Al Jazeera reporter Shireen Abu Akleh. These images are beamed throughout the world, and it creates an international outcry, which in a sense is very difficult for Israel to sustain.
We really appreciate those details. Pierre Clochendler there, our i24 News correspondent in East Jerusalem. Thank you. We're ducking out for a short break now. When we do get back, the results of Lebanon's first election since crises ravage the country. They are not yet in, but some groups are already claiming victory. We'll have that breakdown soon.